All right. This is episode 14, and I have Beaver Kwei with me. Beaver, welcome to the Linsider. Thank you for making time.
Nice to be here. Thank you for the invite.
And this is you are my last guest for season 1.
All right.
Wrapping it up. We've done 13 of these. You're number 14, and that's enough for season 1. I will be back at some point with season 2.
So since I'm the last, who was the first?
The first was my friend Kenny Liu. He's an actor, and we discussed. He went to Berkeley and had a very traditional career as an engineer, and then he was part of the Cal Wushu team, and then did Wushu, competed, and then decided after his career as an engineer, he wanted to pursue acting. So he made like a career switch in his late 20s and is now an actor.
Okay, so your book ended by UC graduates. Great.
That's right. Exactly. Beaver, so we know each other for a long time now. Like
yes,
more than 15 years, going back to 2004. Long time. Yes. Beaver, you work, you're a film producer, an executive, and your daughter is going to Bates in the fall.
That's right. Yes.
Congratulations.
Drink that again. See.
Yeah. And currently we are recording this remotely, but we're both in LA.
Yeah, surprisingly, I'm actually here in Los Angeles.
Yes, welcome back. To start, this is like the question that I usually ask all my guests. I kind of like starting by having everyone talk about their origin story. So I'd love for you to just kind of tell everyone kind of where you're from, who you are, and then at some point we'll get into questions about how you got into entertainment and why.
Sure. Okay, so I will try to condense it into a 5-minute version. It's a bit complicated, but we will endeavor to try to do that.
Yeah, so we got all the time.
Well, I was born in Hong Kong, but we're not from Hong Kong. Some people might know that my father was a fairly active movie director for a Hong Kong movie studio called Shaw's Brothers back in the 1960s and the 1970s. He has a revival lately around the world, in China, also in Asia, due to the online presence of his film. So while he was
and what's your father's name?
His name is Kwei Zihong. Kwei Zihong. You can find him on Wikipedia.
Yeah,
he's
on
link
there. To him in the show notes.
Yeah, he's all over the. He's on Billy.
I love that.
Strangely, so he's had a following now. So he worked in Hong Kong. So I was born in Hong Kong. So I mostly grew up in Taiwan and Hong Kong. Went to kindergarten in Taipei, primary school in Hong Kong, and high school in Southern California. So my entire family immigrated to the United States or re-immigrated back to the United States in the 1980s, because my grandfather was actually born in the United States as well. He went to Cornell here. I was just talking to some kids the other day. My grandfather went to Cornell and graduated there in 1922. Mechanical engineer. Yeah. So he worked in Detroit in the 1930s, strangely.
Wow. And Detroit was like the Paris of the US, basically.
Yeah. So he worked as a draftsman for Ford, I think.
Oh, wow.
In the 1930s, early 1930s. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. And then he moved back to San Francisco, and then during World War II, he went back to China to fight the Japanese.
What?
And then, yeah, there are a lot of
this amazing family history.
A lot of people, overseas Chinese, went back to China to help the war effort. So my grandfather was one of those. So
was he part of the Flying Tigers?
No. He engineer by trade. So I think he was mostly dealing with power plants, locomotive, so on and so forth. I think he was chased by the Japanese during World War II, so they all escaped to Hong Kong during the war and so on and so forth. So, but anyway, so okay, it's 5 minutes, almost up. Anyway, so pretty much spent my youth here in Southern California. Went to high school here, went to college here, and then studied film, and then of course did the various sort of post-graduation type of media industry kind of beginner's job, and then I got lucky and I ended up working for someone that Jason knows very well, our both of our boss, and then started my career kind of that way, and then it's been now 30 years, 30 close to 30 years, a movie industry career.
Yeah, and a lot of amazing films that you've been a part of. I mean, this might seem like a no-brainer, but for a lot of people, like, you know, deciding to move into and be in the entertainment industry is like a big decision. For you, you have your father is a director. But for you, what was it that attracted you to the industry, and how early did you know that you wanted to work in entertainment, and in what capacity?
I always wanted to be in films because I grew up on the Shaw Brothers studio lot in Hong Kong, in Kowloon. So
Oh, wow.
when I was, you know, back in those days in the 60s and 70s, it was a studio system in Hong Kong. So everybody lived on the lot. So your movie stars, your directors, your creative heads, all your craftsmen, they all live in sort of studio dormitories there, but they have different tiers, you know. So the nicer ones for the actors and the directors, and then the medium ones for the art director and cinematographer, and then just general ones for, you know, your carpenters and your painters. So it's easily accessible for me to walk on set onto the studio lot, to go visit my dad, or to just wandering around and then talk to other uncles, we call them 叔叔, you know, other directors who are shooting there. So and then, you know, they know you, the talent, the actors and actresses, they know you. So, you know, so it's that kind of an environment. I grew up in the entire process, throughout the whole process. My mom also worked on the studio lot. She was at one point a Foley artist. And they did all their Foley artists work at night. So I would finish school and take my schoolwork and go to the sound recording stages and go upstairs to the projection room, because the projectionist was my tutor for my math. So, you know, I would be in the projection room, and back in those days, it's all negatives. So they put all these prints in loops. And then so they would keep on playing it, and then downstairs, you know, the Foley artists would do all their martial art film, you know, the swords hitting each other, the closing door, open door, all the horses hoof sounds were coconut shells, you know. So they're doing that, and then I'm upstairs doing my homework, and then I would go downstairs and check out my mom, and then so the engineers would know me, and then so I would sometimes go visit my dad at the print lab, you know, where they do all the answer printing. So, you know, all the strips of negatives and positive prints on you know, in the room with all the chemical smells and all that kind of stuff. So, so it's kind of in my genes. My dad really didn't want me to get back into the film industry because, as everybody knows, and Jason probably know, it's a very difficult industry to survive in. And he, though, was a prolific director, still had a hard time. It wasn't easy for him. So he wanted, you know, like I think like all Asian parents who come to the United States, they want their kids to have stable employment, you know, to go be a doctor, be a lawyer, you know, whatever. So he did not encourage me to get back into the film industry, but you know, it's something that I grew up with. So, you know, I decided to study film.
What did you want to do?
Well, that's the thing. So I actually really wanted to be an editor. So when I was at school at UC Irvine. I think that was the dawn of digital editing. So, I took a lot of editing classes. We were moving from the Moviola thing to online, the digital editing platform. So back in those days, I think it was Premiere 2 point something, 2.3 or something like that. And then Avid was just starting. So we were learning all of that. It was called non-linear editing back in those days. So I was learning that. But while I was at school, I think I just had some capability as the person that could help put everything together. I guess today you would call that producing, but back in those days, you just out like begging people to come on and to do a shoot for student shoot. So, so I kind of got the hang of that a little bit. So even though after school, after graduation, I actually was doing an internship at a trailer editing company in Beverly Hills for 6 or 7 months. They were teaching me how to cut trailers using, I forgot what the platform was. It was a digital platform. It was really clunky back in those days. But I ended up really starting my career, so to speak, getting a job as a producer's assistant. And then I turned out it was actually something that I was okay. I could handle. So, and it just kind of kept going that way. But in the last 30 years, I have always been very keen on editing, and it's easy for me to talk to editors because I kind of learned that a bit, and then I've kept up with it.
Craft.
Yeah, and then with Jet, we do a lot of action films, so you're always in the editing with all the action directors, and they're always saying, you got to cut it like this, cut it like that, and then so. And then they all speak Cantonese. They don't speak English. So I'm doing all the translation with the Western editor. So I'm kind of learning it as we go. Oh, that's how you're supposed to cut it, the action sequences. So, so that's, I wanted to be an editor, but I didn't.
Right. Well, it's a great skill set, regardless, in learning how to tell the story. And what kind of stories did you want to tell? Like, was it did you want to tell those type of stories that your dad did, or did you want to be?
No, my dad. I think my dad was defined by two types of genres that he did. One was the sort of the mafia genre, a little bit exploitative, but I don't think that was his desire. I think that was just a Shaw Brothers Studio sort of directive. If you would compare him to a U.S. filmmaker, I think he himself would like to have compared himself to Martin Scorsese in the early days, like The Taxi Driver, that type of genre of mafia sort of gangster type of films, not the exploitation type. And he was popular and famous for his mafia films in Hong Kong. And this is before all the later stuff that came. And then the second type of films that he sort of gravitated towards to later on in his careers were all of these horror films that he did, all the cult films, the Hex, the I don't know what the English names of these films are, but and that all he actually enjoyed doing horror films. In the beginning, there was one that I really enjoy. It was called Ghost Eyes, Gui. It was about some girl who was washing hair at a salon, and her glasses broke, and then some client came in and said, "Come to my store. I give you free contact lenses." And then when she put on the contact lenses, she, bad things happened to her. It was a really good film. It was shot in the 70s.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, but his sort of desire or interest to really get into the cult horror films was after his sort of visit in Malaysia, where Shaw Brothers sent him down to Malaysia to shoot a bunch of Malaysian films. And that's when he actually kind of found out about the Malaysian voodoo practice and all that. And then that sort of inspired him to use a lot of that material for his subsequent sort of horror films. But neither of those genres are my cup of tea. I am at heart a big sci-fi and action guy. So if given a chance, I would do an action film or a sci-fi film. And of course, with Jed, that's all we did, which is fine by me. I just
and sci-fi, like the one,
a little bit
right?
of sci-fi. Yeah, I think for the one, I really pushed for that because I was like, man, I really wanted to do sci-fi, and then we had a chance to work with James Wong and Glenn Morgan. They were X-File guys back in those days. So and Jet was like, sci-fi, I'm not too sure. I did Black Mass. I don't know what I want to do.
That's a classic too.
Yeah, but he's into the real action stuff. But he was game for it. He went all the way. He got really into it. He did the whole replacing. Because originally the one was for The Rock, Dwayne Johnson.
Oh, what? No, I didn't know that. What?
Oh yeah. So originally the script was written for The Rock, for Dwayne Johnson, and when we got the script, it was all like, the 1990s macho, like Stallone, Arnold type, action. And he had some scheduling conflict or something like that. And so he couldn't be on the film. And so the producers, Glenn Morgan and James, said, why don't we go to Jet Li? So, they came to Jet and said, here's the script. Would you be interested in doing this? And Jed's like, well, that's interesting, but I'm not going to be The Rock. If you guys can work with me to create something different, then I'll be interested. That's what he said. And then those guys are like, yeah, sure. I think the initial thing Jed pitched in was that, it's two of him, right? He said, well, why don't we have one guy, the good guy, use one type of martial art that not only visually and stylistically looks different, but meditatively and then also philosophically, it's different. Whereas the back Jet uses a different Chinese martial art that's more powerful, more straightforward, and then it's more blunt. And so that we are contrasting two different martial art philosophies with each other. And when they heard that, they're like, great, let's do it that way. Oh, yeah. And we were shooting Kiss of the Dragon in Switzerland at that point. I think we were shooting nights. We were in the hotel doing all the hotel scenes. And then so Glenn and James, they flew over to Switzerland and spent a week, or I don't remember, a week or 2 weeks with us. So Jet would shoot at night, and then he would wake up a little earlier than everybody else. I think he wakes up like around 11 or 12. Like we would wrap around 6 or 7, and then he shoot until 11 or 12. Wow. Get up, meet the guys for script meeting from 12 noon all the way to 5 or 6 until they call him to go for go on set for hair and makeup. And then the guys would then go work, and then they would go and sleep, and then they would have something modify, and then next day we'll do it again, and then they'll say, okay, this is what we got, and then we'll go over it, and then we'll just keep going. I don't remember, I think we did this for at least a week or 2 weeks, and it was really cool because so he doing the script meeting, he would like demonstrate
the martial arts.
The martial art, you'd be like Tai Chi is this way, and then the Xing Yi is this way, all this kind of stuff, and it really kind of gave him an education of the difference between the two martial arts styles and philosophically the difference between these two styles and so on and so forth. So anyway, that's the Jet Li sci-fi thing that we did on the one.
Wow, I love hearing that. I don't think a lot of people see that side. Both like what I take away from that is like, he has such a deep knowledge of story, even though most people just think he's like, kicking ass. But the story and the character work, I think, has always been there. And that's something that really sets him apart. And then for what you said, I was also very curious in the and then so now with that experience, and actually what I wanted to go to is that you mentioned earlier on you got into the industry, and then you're working in Hollywood and you're working for a producer. I guess, can you just share a little bit about, like, in that time, what is that like to try to get a start in Hollywood? Because you grew up in Hong Kong on, you said, the Shaw Brothers lot, and that's a different system. What was that like for you to enter into the Hollywood system? What were the surprises and challenges?
I actually, I think it's just as difficult. I think, it's just difficult to break into the entertainment industry. When you start, you're always going, where am I going to find my job, my first job or my second job? How am I going to tell these people that might hire me that I actually, has something to contribute. And at the beginning, and I think even in Hong Kong, in China, I've been now in China for 15 years, and then we see a lot of young people getting into the industry. You need a little bit of luck, and then you still need connections. You still need to sort of network and know people, but of course you're networking with people at your level, so, and then but sometimes when you network and you are a bit lucky, you meet people that can help you when they hear of a possibility or an opportunity. And then and then you seize it and then enroll with it. And it's been the same when I started. In Hong Kong back in those days, in the 60s and 70s, is a little bit different because the Hong Kong film industry, and even today now, but I think Hong Kong industry now, it's not like what it used to be, but mostly is apprenticeship program. So you have a teacher, you have a mentor, whatever craft trade that you're doing, you start, as the very junior person. Now, how you get to be that person, I don't know. From the 1960s, 70s, I'm too young. I was too young. I wouldn't know how those people got their start. But once you're in the system, you start out as somebody's student for quite a bit time before you move up. Whereas in Hollywood, back in the late 80s, early 90s, it really is still networking. You still have to go out and meet people and then talk about who you are and what you do, and then help each other. I mean, I got my first job as a producer's assistant through a job listing board. Back in those days, back in the late 80s, early 90s, the internet was very rudimentary, but at least there was a posting board for all the college grads that were doing films, and then their job listings. I got a job from that, but my second job, actually, with Jet immediately, was through my friends who were looking for work and then found this opportunity and then told me about it. So. It was still, to this day, I'm very grateful to my friends who found that job for me. And a lot of the young people that we work with today, they find employment with us is still through networking. I would a lot of times have my colleagues in the industry, whether it's in the U.S. or in China, would say, hey, so there are young people who who graduated from here, they're looking for a job. Do you guys have openings, for internship or for entry levels? And then so, and in production, that's even more prominent, where you definitely need recommendations from crew members or people who been doing this quite a bit of time, and then they
Yeah.
would recommend you. Yeah, it's still the same actually.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great perspective, because I guess where I was going with that question, I was actually wondering about any challenges just being, from Asia, or, not from like some sort of family, like from in Hollywood, right? Are there's challenges there? But I like how you've just really boiled it down that at the end of the day, there's ways to get in if you want to, and it's about networking and putting the time in to figure things out.
Yeah, I actually did not. And I mean, the limited time that I had working in the industry before JED, I did not encounter any kind of racial profiling or prejudice. I mean, people who interviewed me for jobs just interviewed me as a person who graduated from college and has limited experience, but do film.
Yeah.
My pedigree did not apply because it's Hong Kong, right? It doesn't work.
Right.
And I got hired based on what I said, and and I don't, I didn't think there was any sort of like, hey, you're Asian, and you can't do this or whatnot. But of course, I've heard other people back in those days. I had a lot of Korean friends back in those days, in the late 80s and early 90s, that they had a glass ceiling in the industry where they could only get to so far, and then they couldn't move up anymore. And a lot of these people got frustrated and moved back to South Korea, and then now they're all captains of the industry. They took what they learned here in the United States and applied it back in their home, and they're very successful in their home country. But in those days, from the employment as a point of view, it seems like there were some sort of unintentional or intentional, whatever, sort of deterrence for or difficulty for maybe for Asians to move up as fast as, say, other racial groups, so to speak.
Yeah. But yeah, just but if you focus on that, that's the wrong energy. Focusing on actually putting the work in and finding the opportunities, that's where we should all focus on. Another question I had for you is, you saw it, when you were younger, and then you worked for Jet, and so you saw also just the amazing, and then it's your personal interest too in terms of action films. And nowadays, one thing I've wondered is that action films are something that the Hong Kong talent, and I would say in China and Asia, it's so well known and it travels. Why do you think it is that now kind of the action film genre in Asia, it doesn't travel as much anymore? Those films now that are being made are very local. It's much more rare to have those films travel, but there was a period of time when they traveled very well.
Yeah, there was a time, starting with Bruce Lee, right, and then it went all the way to Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and then and then Donnie, and then the Trey Huck movies, and all of that. There was a period that when that happened, and then all the Wu Ping stuff that was very popular in the West, and then it kind of accumulated with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and then it kind of seemed like after that it just started to kind of faded out a little bit.
Yeah, Hero, and then all the Zhang Yimou films right after that. Those were, I feel like, cult classics here too.
Right, and then it became more Western films had more authentic martial arts integrated into their storytelling.
Right.
And so then, and what's happening with Asia in terms of, well, I mean, there was a period when the Korean action films had a bit of inspired storytelling, so to speak.
Like
when
Old Boy.
Old Boy. They had a different style of fighting and so on and so forth. I think the reason why, I think the key is innovation. It's of course there's still innovation in Asia. It doesn't matter. Is it China or Hong Kong or Korea, but it's just not as prevalent as it used to be, and it has to also do with viewers. In Chinese, this is called 审美疲劳, which is, I guess, in English
The
would be
taste, just the taste and the trends, right?
the trend, yeah, taste, a diminishing return, so to speak. It's
Yeah.
kind of like, in the West, most people don't really go and make spectacular Western anymore,
Sure.
because everybody's seen so much of it, and there's so many different ways to tell this Western story has been done. So now, even though when you do a Western, it's just harder to do. So I think the traditional martial art films in Asia runs a similar sort of pattern with the Western pattern, here in the West. And then on top of that, innovation in storytelling, and then also in technology. That's just for some reason, that's just less of that is being done in Asia than in the West, in terms of how to integrate martial art into different kinds of storytelling.
Yes.
And then also
key.
using technology and then research and development to improve on the way that it can be realized on screen. And that, it's there's always a possibility for a second renaissance of the genre in Asia. It just takes filmmakers who have a strong interest in doing this. Maybe at this period in time, maybe we just don't have a lot of filmmakers that are interested in doing this. Just like in the West, like probably most Western filmmakers right now are not. If you say what kind of films do you want to make, I don't think the first film they say they want to make is, I want to make a Western. Maybe they say, yeah, I want to make a Western.
Or very few.
At some point, I want to make a Western, a cool looking Western. I have some thoughts about how to do it differently, but it's not like I want to go make a Western. So, for Chinese or, I don't know, Japanese or Korean filmmakers, maybe, not the first thing they in their mind would be like, I want to go make a martial art film. And then also the second thing is, action stars takes time to cultivate, and we don't have the next, Jet Li or Jackie Chan or Donnie yet. So that takes time as well. I mean, if you go back and look at historically, I mean, Jackie's made so many action films in Hong Kong before he matured into what he ultimately became internationally, and same with Jet. And so it takes time,
a
so
lot of time.
yeah,
I mean, even look at like Wu Jing, right? He's maybe the closest,
right?
But it took him forever to get to
It did.
level.
It did. And then not all of Jackie's film or Jet's film or Wu Jing's films were great. Some were not that good, but they had to persist. And so in our modern sort of 21st century kind of social media, short attention spans kind of entertainment space, is there room for these type of cultivation? I don't know, maybe, or maybe it has to take an innovative form, and whatever that innovative form is, somebody has to discover it, and it hasn't been discovered yet.
I like what you're saying. It's basically things need to evolve, right? And move with the market, move with the audience. And so then in terms of your career, you started in Hollywood, spent a lot of time working with Jet, which is around the world. And then later on, for the last 15 years, you've been in China. And in China, though you mentioned that the type of films that you like to make are action and sci-fi, in China, like a lot of your initial and early films are very kind of not that genre. They're dramas, or they're comedies, or love stories. I guess talk a little bit about how you decided to go and pursue that opportunity in China, and then the films and the stories that you decide to produce? Like how did you decide, how did you decide which ones to pick?
Okay. I think the decision to go back to China, deeply rooted from the historical presence of my dad, being a filmmaker in Hong Kong. So I have awareness of that, but I didn't want to go back to Hong Kong because I knew, what a Hong Kong film industry existence would look like. And I kind of did that already with my dad. I mean, people always ask me, hey, how come you didn't want to be a director? I said, my dad made, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 films. I've participated in these experience of directing 40, 50, 60 times or 30, 40 times already. And that's not an experience that I need to go and relive again. So I didn't really needed to do the Hong Kong experience, and China was always fascinating to me. It continues to fascinates me, but back in those days, and so that was already in the back of my head. And then I was a bit frustrated with Hollywood, and this is something I think, I don't know what a Jet would remember, but I talked to him a little bit about it. It's just that back in those days, the type of scripts that were presented to us, there wasn't a really productive sort of Asian narrative that could be much more powerful than what the stereotypical Asian narrative that we were given back in the 1990s or early 2000. I mean, we were always, these action films, they can be pretty genre driven. So we were always, when we were reading scripts, we were always, telling the producers, can we not have this scene in another illegal Chinese immigrant downtown Manhattan laundromat or textile shop? Can we not have naked Chinese prostitute female bodies in trash cans? Can we have Chinese people actually speaking proper English, and they don't have to all speak broken English or not at all? So it was just a constant struggle to try to replace that with something that can be just as entertaining but slightly different, and so,
also more true to actual real life, because
right. I mean, you can see, I mean, we don't mind in this narrative that you have some Asians that that are fresh off the boat, but there are also Asians that've been here for a long time, so you don't have to be all one type or another. And so that was a bit frustrating. And so at that point I said, well, you know what, if it was difficult to work on really good narrative here, I want to take a crack at it from the other side. Maybe we can show the world, that there can be good Chinese story that can be told in a very modernized way. So that was the intention. And then the early 2000s, China was a brand new place, and it was fascinating. So and at that point, Warner Brother wanted to go and start an initiative. So bring some technology into China. And Warner Brother has a history of doing that. They've I think they did the first co-production with Hong Kong on Enter the Dragon, right, with Bruce Lee and Raymond Chow back in those days. So they do have a history of that. So go back and it's a brave new world. But the minute that I got there, I realized that it was literally doing everything from the ground up again. They just started. So they were trying to figure out how to do genre films. and a lot of the parts of movie making was still the modern sort of the what we take for granted now, the sort of the modern filmmaking mechanisms were just starting in China back in those days. I mean, they make great films, because Zhang Yimou did great films in the 1990s. And Chen Kaige, Feng Xiaogang, those are fantastic movies.
There's actually a lot of great filmmakers.
A lot of great films. But to try to do the genre material, the commercial narrative, that took a little bit of work. So in the beginning, so it was like, let's not even just go and try to make an action film. Let's just make some films, whether it's a romantic comedy or drama. And let's bring in various types of technology and skill sets and see whether or not they can be integrated. Whether is it from the storytelling, from the script stage to production stage to post-production stage, and or the visual effects stage, and see how it can be done. One of the big things that we were trying to do, it doesn't matter what the genre was to do sort of the the integrated film production, where it was already being done in the West, was using VFX as part of storytelling, that VFX would seamlessly blend into the storytelling without you noticing that there was VFX involved.
Yep.
And that workflow, that protocol, meaning that the pre-planning and pre-production, and then the discipline that one must have during production, and then the sort of the application, and then the realization of all that planning, and then the discipline in production, and then being realized in post-production. That was something new for China in those days. So and then so we were, so when we were doing Sophie's Revenge, which is a romantic comedy, it was technologically speaking, and then also workflow wise, that was quite innovative at that time, is because you literally have to have your production design, your cinematographer, your VFX supervisor, and your director, and the whole team pre-plan everything out before we started the film. And then when you're shooting, it's you're shooting parts, and then everything gets put together in post, which is something very simple nowadays, or even back in those days for the US. But it was something that was just at its infancy stage back in those days in China. Now everybody does it. It's it's very easy now. But that was exciting at that time.
Did you, at that time, because I mean that movie I think stood out in so many ways, so I would say it was a very pioneering film. Did you guys realize that?
Oh yeah. We went into it knowing that we are trying something new. We didn't know whether or not it will work, but I think at that moment, if you want to pioneer, China's the place to go. And it continues to be so, so that's what's so exciting about the Chinese film industry, is where you can continue to pioneer and try things out, and come up with something exciting and different and innovative.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing is, like, I want to say, like, it feels like there's also, to some extent, what people like to focus on in the West is, like, they like to criticize China about certain things, and it's always the same criticism. Whereas it actually working and living in China, you realize actually there's a lot less baggage in some ways in China. For example, like on Sophie's Revenge, you guys had a female director, and that film broke box office records at the time, right? And did you guys feel that was like a special or unique thing as well? Or was it just, that was how the project came together?
Well, I mean, the story was from the director, from Eva. So it was her project, her script.
Right. But you guys had to realize her talent and back her.
Yes. But, in interacting with various companies, and then also with the crew, or just the general perception of the project, there wasn't anything like, it was a female director, or it's a. I think the only thing that we encountered that people were hesitant was that people weren't sure that the Chinese audience would like a classic romantic comedy.
Right. Yeah.
A screwball, almost a little bit of a slapstick romantic comedy at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that was untried, and that the hesitation was there. But and then we had to prove ourselves in the prep and during production period to people that, this is what it will look like, and you know what, it might have a shot. So
what did you guys draw upon to make it more familiar to the Chinese audience?
That's a really good question. Nothing about that film is familiar to the Chinese audience.
But I can remember. I mean, I feel like
the talent, right? The two actors in that film, all four actresses in that film were familiar with the Chinese audience.
Yeah.
So they anchored it for us.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, in some ways, you paid homage to like a Hollywood style of romantic comedy, but also I feel like growing up, when I watched things in Taiwan or Hong Kong, like content there, like especially TV shows, like there's some like kind of that kind of silly rom-com kind of stuff back in that days. It's just you haven't seen it on the big screen in China.
Well, my dad was making this type of films in the early 60s. It's not early, mid 60s, I think. But there's traces of that. I mean, so we're familiar with that heritage. So we had to modernize it a bit, And the good thing about it was that the filmmakers and the talents in that film, they all understood that, and then they were game. They want to try something different, try something new. So it just luckily it worked out,
Yeah. And for you, now, and what is the type of story that you look for, that you're drawn towards? Because as I look at your credits, I would say, like, if I go like the Precipice Game, right? That is groundbreaking in its own way too. Then you have The Meg, which is also very groundbreaking, being a co-production that succeeded so phenomenally. And all these other projects that you're doing, they're all, I would say, like, I think like it's a pretty notable thing that I see that's like traces. Like, it seems like you're trying to do something different each time, like pushing things in a certain way. Is that deliberate, or do you think that's just where the opportunities are that you found?
No, it is deliberate. So for me, I'm always trying to try something new, which with each project that I was part of, whether it was given to me as an assignment or it was something that that whoever approached me and said, "Hey, would you be interested?" Of course, if there wasn't something different about it, then I wouldn't be interested. But even for assignments that are sent to me, I would gravitate toward ones that has some kind of challenge that we have to meet and excel in. So and then at heart, now that I've been doing this for a while, I know that I am pretty much a B movie person. So so I gravitate toward a bit more the genre material, but I'm not. I am not dark as my father. My father is very dark. I don't like to tell stories that are very, very dark. I think it just. I think for me, everybody's different, but for me, I think there's enough darkness in the world that if we're given an opportunity to present some lightness, I would choose to present the lightness. If other people want to hit harder on the darkness, go for it. That's they can go ahead and do that, and I just don't want to do that on my end.
Got it. And being in China, for as long as you have, like, and having a background as a very cross-cultural person, like you've basically spent your life between Asia and the US. Like, what are some of the challenges that you've seen, or what advice, I guess, do you have for folks that are trying to navigate the two? Because I feel like it's a quite a tricky balance, especially nowadays when you see all these headlines about trade wars and all this kind of stuff.
Right. One thing is very clear, and it does not have to do with politics or economics or anything like that. It has to do with the type of industries that we're in, and the essence of every single one of us who are in this industry. What we fundamentally in our core, what we need to have, which is that it doesn't really matter whether you're working as a writer or as a director or as a cinematographer or as a marketing executive or distribution executive or financial controller for a film. Ultimately, what needs to be deep in your heart and you need to identify yourself with is that you like to tell a story, and you want to be part of the storytelling process, or even you want to tell a good story or a story that is meaningful to you. And if you feel that, then for someone who is making Western stories or making Chinese stories, then it is, you need to identify with one or the other. So and the weird thing about this is it's not logical. It's kind of counterintuitive. It's, if you are a Western person that fully embrace the Chinese narrative, somehow the story that you tell hopefully will resonate with the Chinese audience, but it will not detach you with the roots from the West.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a Chinese filmmaker who wants to tell Western story, you need to fully embrace the West, but your Chinese roots will still be there. Mm-hmm. So there is no in between. Like, I do half Western, half Asia, half Western, half China. None of those ever work, and they all fail.
Yep.
In terms of audience recognition, critically, and then also in terms of business. You have to be genuine, and you have to go all in, and you want to tell their story, and you have to be genuine about it. You cannot be disingenuous about it. So for me, I grew up in Southern California. I consider myself a Californian. Yeah. So that's just in me. So I don't have to go and do anything special about it. For me, I make it a point to completely immerse myself in the Chinese culture, and to want to find out what their stories are and what their psyche is, what their angst are, and how they feel about themselves and about the world. And then from their point of view, if I see that there are stories that are strong and worth telling, then I would want to be part of it. But if we do these, sometimes we get these scripts where it's just it's like you take. I'm always, my friends are always making fun of me that I'm always making food metaphors, which is, a lot of times you get these scripts. It's like on a plate. It's like there's some fried rice, but then there's also a hamburger, and neither the Chinese people want to eat it nor the American people want to eat it.
Yeah, not a satisfying meal.
It's just weird. Yeah. Hamburgers and fried rice together doesn't really mix.
Yeah.
So I
like that analogy.
We get it all the time.
Yeah.
So, and then there's variations of this, right? So, and then of course, sometimes here, I go to Panda Express, but we all know that's a different kind of Chinese food, right? It's
Right.
much more Americanized Chinese food.
Yeah.
And I think if you serve that in China, I think Chinese people would say, well, that's not really Chinese food. So then you go, wait a second, so my narrative is that, is that something more authentic? Does it have, not necessarily that it has to have chicken feet in it, but this is something that like the kung pao chicken from American Chinese restaurant is slightly different from the kung pao chicken you'll get in Sichuan, right? So if you're doing the Chinese narrative, then you're making the Chinese version of the kung pao chicken versus the American version of the kung pao chicken. So you really need to know who's eating that kung pao chicken, and you can't do the American style kung pao chicken for China. Chinese people won't eat it, and Americans will eat it. And then if you do the really Chinese version of kung pao chicken, Americans might not eat it because it's too spicy, too numbing. The chicken had bones, or the chicken is too small, and and all this kind of stuff, right? The taste is too strong. So in terms of telling stories, for the last 15 years, it's been a continuing sort of evolving understanding and learning of what it means to tell a good and strong Chinese stories. And from that, maybe we can tell the world about that story. Like you said about how the Hong Kong martial art films later on became worldwide popular and obtained a lot of resonance. And I think it's the counterintuitive way is that you really need to tell a very good Chinese story first. And then from that point on, it will find resonance with stories, audience worldwide. And then, I think we were fairly successful with The Meg, even though it's a big monster
phenomenally successful, I would say.
Right. And then, but there's something there, it's because when after the film came out, when we found out from people who've seen the film around the world, whether they're in Mexico or they're in France or UK, US, and from China, they all liked it, enjoyed it, for some very specific reasons, and not just because there's a big shark or there's Jason Statham, but there there are other components in there that some of them are actually more Asian, surprisingly.
Totally. And also talk about one thing I noticed also in what you've done in the last 15 years is that you've had this ability to identify directing talent like very early, right? You worked with Ning Hao like very early, you worked with Eva very early. How are you able to discover these talents? Did you know they would become, who they are now? And why did you decide you wanted to work with them at that time?
I think that I think I have some advantage because my dad was a director. So, I live with the director. I know how a director will talk. I know how a director will write or interact, or how to tell a story, and how to behave themselves with other talent, and and how to handle things during stress, because I literally lived my father's life from a little kid, until when I grow up. So when I see a director or a potential director, deep inside me, I know whether or not that person's got what it takes to be a director. The only thing that I need to know is whether or not technically they have the skill set, and where are they in their technical skill sets that they are, so then I can do a good assessment and then figure out how to support them and help them, and to help them to grow. So I didn't intentionally go out to seek out new directors, but I think back in the days when we were doing this in the beginning, it was mostly younger directors who who have the pioneering spirit and who have the vision to go try something new. So so we work together. But as that sort of continue, it just turns into that People just kind of know that I'm friendly with new directors, and and that I support them, and
Yeah.
and I don't mind supporting new directors. I think that's the only way that I mean, even in this industry, even in Hollywood, I'm I think a lot of directors also had mentors and support, right, from producers or from studio heads. I mean, there's so many stories, right,
Yep.
of famous directors who got their start because people helped them. So,
Yep.
and I was helped by people as well. So, I mean, Jet helped me, and I'm sure he supported you, and I have other people that helped me when I was young and beginning. So,
Yep.
that I think it's our obligations to do so, to keep the story going and to keep the torch going and to discover new talent that we can work with, because they probably have new and exciting stories to tell that we, as we get older, we're seeing things not in a different perspective that they're doing. So that's what happened.
Very well said. I like that. And going forward, what are some stories that you want to see that you haven't made yet? Like whether it's a genre or a particular um, type of story or a particular narrative. What do you think are some of those stories that you want to see that the world has not seen yet?
Uh, for me, just because of personal preference, I would definitely, if I have the opportunity, I would choose to do more sci-fi and action, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But at a different level, at a narrative level, I think I'm more interested in uh, telling stories that maybe because of historical situation, or just that there's just so much going on that some of these stories are not being told, that I would like to help bring them to awareness, and
Mm-hmm.
specifically having to do with. I think everybody goes to the same stage as they grow older and stuff. But what I am I'm fascinated with is that um, we are no different from generations before us, and meaning that they also took risks, and they were also out in the world, and they did some incredible things.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it would be, we're Asians, right? Chinese. So there are a lot of stories of these people that were brave, and they took on the world, and their stories can be told. But it probably in a genre setting instead of much more prestigious setting, because I don't think
Right.
I'm very good at that yet. So haven't learned that yet.
You never
Uh,
know. Look at Jason Blum. Now he is competing for Oscars.
oh yeah. I mean, like I was surprised when I watched Green Book. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed their previous films. I mean, they were extremely
Yeah. I
funny.
mean, yeah, the Fairly, right?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that.
From
But
Something About Mary to Green Book.
incredible, right?
Yeah.
So that's that, and so been working on that, and so there's a bit of personal preference in the projects that I like to select to work on in the future, um, but still mostly genre material. Hopefully, I'll be doing some sci-fi stuff in China,
Mm.
and sci-fi as in it's a vehicle to help to tell human story
Yeah.
instead of just showing a whole bunch of hardware.
Yeah.
So
Or scaring people about the apocalypse or robo
right, yeah,
apocalypse.
that in itself, I've had such a interesting discussion with my Chinese colleague. It's that there are two concepts that
Mm.
don't really kind of apply to the Chinese culture. One is dystopia, the other is end of the world,
Mm.
which is very Western. And I
Mm.
think it all I think end of the world comes from the sort of the biblical sort of
Yeah.
precedents, right? So, but in Chinese narrative, in all our mythology, there's no end of the world.
Mm.
I mean, the world ends and it starts again,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the whole end of the world sort of concept, it's a very Western concept, and that's
Mm.
very interesting when we apply that to Chinese sci-fi.
Mm.
So there you go. That's a hamburger and fried rice. You can't do a Chinese end of the world.
Mm.
It doesn't work because the
Mm.
world doesn't end by the Chinese culture.
Mm.
So you cannot have scenes where like some generic Chinese city. It's all abandoned and apocalypse. It looks great visually, but the narrative doesn't really work. That doesn't.
Mm.
It does. It won't happen like that. It doesn't work for us like that. So that's very interesting. And then the whole dystopia thing is completely different for us too.
Right.
So that's the excitement. It's because if we could crack that,
Mm.
if we can use sci-fi and say, nah, end of the world doesn't work for us. But if in a situation where if end of the world scenario that usually happens in the West would happen in our Asian culture, this is how it would look like. Right.
Yeah.
And then so that will be completely different. And then so
Mm-hmm.
when the Western audience watch it, they'll be like, oh, that's interesting. Never
Yep.
thought that it would be like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now they have a better understanding of us, and that help
Yep.
us to have a dialogue of
Yep.
conversation about what's different between us and what's similar between us,
Right.
right? So that will supersede all the other stuff. So
Mm.
anyway,
I love that.
ambitious, but
I
we'll
love that
try.
perspective. Yeah, but it'll be so fresh, right? When you find out how to go about doing that and telling that
Right.
story. Another question, and maybe we can wrap it up in a couple more. But you've been through your career at companies that have had partnerships with Warner Brothers in various iterations, and then you've been in China long enough where we've seen the rise and fall of these companies. What is your perspective on all these changes? And as a producer, how do you keep going through all these various turmoils and kind of periods of instability?
Well, there's two different things. One is the sort of the rapid sort of life cycle of movie companies from birth to its demise. That I am supported by historical references as a base to handling interactions with this type of business cycles, which is as you remember, in the 1920s in Hollywood, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of movie companies,
Mm-hmm.
and anybody and everybody were making movies. Correct, I might be misspoken, but there were a lot of film companies back in those days, and a lot of them went around during Great Depression, and then after the Great Depression, there were only a few left, and then a lot of them merged together. But there was a way to do business then, and there were reasons why some companies did not survive and some did. So by looking back in history, and you find that people are people. It doesn't matter that you're Chinese or Americans or British or Finnish. People still sort of behave fundamentally similarly, and in that, so then in terms of business, and it goes back to the peculiar nature of our business, which is that fundamentally, you need to have good, keen, strong, and flexible business sense, but you need to tell good quality stories.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember from the 1920s and 30s, all the stories that we remember from Hollywood are the stories that were told really well. You don't remember any of the stories that weren't told well, and those
Mm-hmm.
companies probably weren't around anymore. So that is, to me anyway, I might be wrong, is the way to navigate sort of this growth continuing expansions of the industry, is that to stay true to good storytelling, good quality storytelling. Of course, you need to be, have some business smart, and to just sort of, for me, everybody is different. Okay. For me to navigate these type of water, I use Shackleton a bit more than Robert Barron. Shackleton is the guy who got stranded in the North Pole. Is it North Pole or Antarctica? And then and then survived and took all his entire crew back home without losing anybody. And everybody was pretty happy, by the way. All his crew were happy. So that's a much more stable way for me than doing some captain of the industry or that kind of way. Those are much more risky. The other thing that you were saying, I think the first thing that you were saying, what's the first thing that you were asking me?
I was asking you about Warner Brothers. The various iterations they've been part of, and then now, of course, not just in China, they're going through something different, but even at the headquarters, they're going through this huge change.
I wouldn't talk about just Warner Brothers specifically, but I would just say that I've been involved with many sort of collaborations between different cultures. This goes even way back to the Jet Li days, when we were working with the British and the French. We were working with the Japanese, so on and so forth. It's just that there is a different way of doing business between the different cultures. Just the speed, the type of things that a culture will pay attention to versus the other, the detail levels, and then of course there's the language issues, and it can be done though, and it can be done very successfully. It just takes a lot of communication. I think doing it's not specifically Warner Brother. I mean, just working with any partner. We just did the film with Finland. You need to talk 3 times more than you would usually talk, just to make sure everybody is on the same page. They understand what's going on, the intention behind the conversation, and then also the spirit of the conversation. You just need to put a lot more effort in it, and that's whether you're working with a smaller group of people, a smaller company, or big corporation like Warner Brothers. It's still communication.
Over communicate. That's great. And then my final question is, this life as a producer and just in the film industry or entertainment, people think it's like fun and leisurely, which it can be, but also it's a lot of work, and you travel a lot too, and a lot of times you're away from your family. For you, what do you do for self-care? How do you keep sane and keep your energy up when there's so much stuff going on? What are some things you do for self-care?
I only have one thing that I do, which is I'm a Jason, as you know, I'm an avid runner. So I'm a long distance runner. So everywhere I go, no matter where I am, the first thing I do is, the minute that I'm in a hotel, I look at the map and see where I can go out and do my 6-mile run.
Wow.
So, and then I also gravitate towards selecting production hotels near potential running areas.
Really?
Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah. Okay. So if I'm producing a movie, I don't really care about, of course the movie stars and the director needs to be in their 5-star hotels, but I don't really need to be in a 5-star. I would rather be with the crew at a hotel that is near either a park or some kind of river that has a running track, or some sort of a stadium, so then I can go and do my runs in the morning or at night. And different people do different things. Some people
Yeah.
meditate, some people do yoga. I do running,
Exactly.
and running is type of meditation for me
Mhm.
because as you do long distance run, sometimes when you run more than an hour, sometimes I run for 2 hours. You kind of process a lot of things
Yep.
as you are running. Don't run
Yep.
on the street; you get hit by cars. So I'm always trying to find areas where there's no like I'm
Safe.
on a Riviera Trail or inside a park. So you
Yep.
could zone out, let your brain sort of unwind, and it kind of go through it, sort of categorizing things and processing things until all of that is processed, and then you're clear. Then you exfoliate, you get rid of all your toxins, and then you sweat it out. You drink a lot of water, and then so you de-stress. And I've been doing this now for 15 years, 16 years, and it's been working for me. Because it's very stressful being doing this kind of work and a lot of travel. So you have to find something, and of course, don't go to drugs or go to alcohol. Do something healthy. And for me, running, it's something that I do, and then I make it I intentionally compete or participate in a official marathon every year. So that kind of helps me to design my exercise schedule for a year. So that way, you have a goal in the back of your mind that you have to go and make sure you do all these things while you're still working. So
That's really cool.
Yeah, this is that's what I do, and I really enjoy running.
Do you have a competition this year that you're entered in?
I was thinking about joining the Beijing Marathon, which I actually haven't run before.
Oh wow!
Or the Shanghai Marathon, but because of the COVID, they haven't really announced it officially yet. So we're waiting for the website to open so that we can sign up.
That's cool. I love your perspective on it because, like you said, everyone's different. But what I appreciate about what you said is that when most people talk about running, they talk about like fitness, exercise, like body. And you talked about that, but your focus is more on like the mental side of it, the clarity, the stress, the mental health, that kind of the focus. And that's a great perspective to have.
Yeah, it's two things. I mean, one, it's physiological. You're self-medicating, really, because any form of exercise, if you do for a long enough period, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, if it's rigorous enough, your body pumps out all of these hormones and all of this chemical
Toxins.
that makes you happy.
Yeah.
For the next 2 days. So then you don't need anything else because your body is actually self-medicating and it's all natural. So the sort of runner's high, but it's not a runner's high, it's any kind of workout high, right? And then so I've actually literally have experienced that, where you're encountering something very difficult that you have to deal with, but if you have that sort of adjusted body dealing with it, you have a smile on your face dealing with that problem. But if I haven't run for 3 days, and I'm dealing with that problem, you're grouchy. And then my colleagues now know me so well, they'll be like, Beaver, you haven't run for 2 days, right? I'm like, yeah. They'll be like, don't talk about it, go for a run and come back and talk about this later. And then I'll be like, that's right, I should go running. So that's the physiological part. But the other part is what I just said, which is completely spiritual and mental. And everybody do it differently. But for me, running it really works for me. Scuba diving will be great too, but you can't go scuba diving every day, right? So
yes, I love scuba diving. That's awesome. That's a different form of meditation. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. You achieve sort of the same Zen state once you get to a certain place. Like when you're scuba diving, there's that sweet spot where you have neutral buoyancy.
Yeah.
You're just floating there. You're not going up. You're not going down. And you're just there, right? You look up, you look down, you look left and right. It's blue. And then maybe there's some fish. And you don't have to do anything, right? And then all you hear is the bubbles.
Yep.
Right. So running for me sometimes at that point is you are also in that state of mind where you're like, wow, I'm just running, and I'm clear.
Yep.
and then you get your balance, you know.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Beaver, thank you so much for taking the time and being on this podcast and doing this with me. I've really enjoyed this experience, and of course have enjoyed knowing you throughout all these years, and look forward to your next films. So good luck with everything. Thank you for being the guest
Thank you.
on my podcast, and for being the final guest of season 1.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. All right. Talk to you
Bye-bye.
soon.
Talk to
Bye.
you later. Bye.